You're listening to Always Player One, a solo board gaming podcast.
Hello and welcome to Always Player One. I'm Scruffy.
And I'm Norm, and today we're going to be talking about Lost Ruins of Arnak. Today we also have a very special guest, Brandon Waite. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Very glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us.
Before we dive into Lost Ruins of Arnak, though, for anybody who doesn't know what Lost Ruins of Arnak is, Scruffy, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about the game?
Okay, so Lost Ruins of Arnak is a soloable worker placement deck building game with a focus on resource management and manipulation. In Lost Ruins of Arnak, you take on the role of a group of archaeologists exploring a map in order to gather resources to fund your research to reach a lost temple. Each turn, you will take one main action as well as any number of quick actions. The main actions include playing powerful cards, placing one of your two workers on the map to gather resources from a revealed space or explore a new one, buying cards for your deck, taking on monsters, and finally researching. After you have finished taking all actions for the round, you pass. The game has 5 rounds in total and ends once all players pass on the last round. Most points wins at the end of the game, and points mainly come from the research track, but can also be picked up from doing basically any of the main actions. In solo mode, you play against a rival who takes 10 turns every round. The deck they use to determine what they will do on their turn has variable difficulty, but will always result in them taking the same 10 actions every round. The rival always acts first, and the main focus of their turns is to block the player in various challenging ways. There is an additional supplement for the rival, which sees 3 of a possible 5 objective cards being flipped each round, which gives your rival 2 points every time they complete one before the player. For example, one of the cards might be the first player to place all their workers, and if the rival does it first, they score 2 points. If the player gets there first, they deny the points to the rival, but don't take them for themselves. This mini expansion also brings in another set of cards to make the rival's deck even harder if desired. I think that's Lost Ruins of Arnak in a nutshell there. Guys, is there anything either of you two would like to add to set the scene for our listeners for Lost Ruins?
Imagine you are cutting your way through the jungle with a machete, and you've come across a temple in the middle of the jungle, and you think to yourself, this is going to help me climb the research track so quickly. That's the thematic feeling I get when I play this game.
And then there's the but there's also a big monster serpent jade golem thing that I should probably deal with.
Exactly.
Or I might be afraid of them later.
Yes. The fear of the monster will come back to haunt you if you don't deal with them now.
Highly thematic. Brilliant. I love it.
We'll unpack the mechanics here in a bit more detail as we go throughout the episode, and we'll really hone in on the specifics there. But I think before we do, let's introduce you a little bit more, Brandon, for anyone who's listening who doesn't know who you are. So we always ask the same question of our guests, and I'll let Norm do the honors because it's his very special pleasure he loves to do every time we have a guest on. Take it away, Norm.
I really appreciate the introduction and the build up to the question there, Scruffy. Given the pomp and circumstance that it deserves, I appreciate that. So, Brandon, for our listeners who don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about how you got into the hobby, what kind of games you enjoy now, and what you're best known for in the hobby.
Sure. So I got into the hobby back around 2010, I think. Prior to that, I'd only ever played, Monopoly, Life, the kind of standard board game stuff that you play. And I hated board games because of that. I just thought they were a messy luck fest that left everybody mad at each other by the end of the session. And then when I moved to the place where I live now, I moved here to go to seminary and to get my master's degree. And when I did, I met a group of people who were into board games. And I thought to myself, I've made a huge mistake coming here. What's wrong with these people? But they brought a copy of Catan over to my house, and I loved it. It engaged me in a way that a game never had. And I still own a copy of it to this day. I don't play it that often, but I enjoy it, and it did a lot for me in those early days. That moved on to a copy of Dominion that my friend had, and that just completely blew my mind the first time I played it. And then my next games after that were much bigger. It was I moved on to Eclipse, and the friend who had Eclipse also had a copy of Mage Knight, and he brought over a copy one night, and we started playing. I realize now how foolish this is, but we started playing about 8 p.m., maybe 3-player game of Mage Knight, which you should never do. You should never ever play a 3-player game of Mage Knight, in my opinion. And we were up until 3 a.m. And even though I was tired and angry by the time it was over, I still thought this game is so fascinating. And
Hmm.
what really grabbed my attention was I saw the box sitting there, and I saw that it said 1 to 5 players on the box. And my first two thoughts were, oh my god, who would ever play this with 5 players? But but also, what would it be like to play this 1 player? And so I borrowed it from him, and man, that's what started me down the road. Mage Knight, Friday, and then I just discovered more and more games from there. But eventually, that led me to like seeking out solo-based media and that sort of thing, and that led to the creation of my own podcast, which is Solosaurus, which I'm no longer the host of, but I started it with my friend Carter Mackey back in 2018. And I think we hosted for just shy of 70 episodes before we needed to move on to other things. But I loved it. I loved critiquing games. I love playing new games. And we had a really great following and community that built up around it. And there's some things I miss about it. And that was why I was really excited when you guys reached out about doing this, because it's just not that often that people ask my opinion on things, and I get to just give it.
Well, we were very excited that you said yes because before we started our show, of course, we listened to Solosaurus. So for that reason, very excited to have you on indeed, and very excited to talk about Lost Ruins of Arnak as well.
Hmm.
Scruffy, I don't know where you want to start with this one. Have you been enjoying this title?
I have, and it's a game I hadn't even heard of until we reached out and got in contact with you.
No
Uh,
way.
yeah,
Where have you been living?
I know exactly. Terrible, right? But no, it was the we had a bit of a chat about what games are you interested in, what games are you keen to explore and play, and you mentioned it, and I give it a little Google and just fell in love with how it looks on a first level. And when you see a game and you think, oh, it's a beautiful game, and then you have that little nagging voice in the back of your head that says, bet it's rubbish.
I absolutely know that voice.
Some of the best games just have really awkward design and a clunky, horrible interface, and you kind of have to reference symbols and stuff. This one is just crystal clear and beautiful, and I'm so glad that the game didn't disappoint as well. When I got around to playing it, I've fallen in love with the game truly, madly, deeply. It's fantastic.
Excellent. That was my first impression of it as well. When I saw the announcement on Board Game Geek, it seems like every year around Essen, there are a couple of games that start getting a lot of buzz, and this was one of those games from last year's Essen, I believe. And at first, I saw, if I'm honest with you, I thought, well, that's a pretty cover, but it's just a euro, and I like euros, but I just thought I mostly feel like I'm seeing the same 4 things over and over again. They just don't excite me quite the way they used to. But then I started digging into it a little bit, and I heard it has deck building, which I love, and it has worker placement, which I want to love, but I'm often disappointed by. And the more I read about it, the more I just thought, man, this sounds fascinating, and the artwork is maybe I don't know if Norm or Scruffy you feel this way, but it's a little old school to me. It has kind of a painted, charming look and feel to
Mhm.
it in a way that I feel like you don't see that often anymore.
Yes.
Mm. It fits the theme really well. The thing that I'd say it's kind of closest to, if anyone's heard of, is something like El Dorado, but it's better. It's like
Yeah.
a step up. It's the same sort of theme as well, like that sort of jungle explorer type thing. But it's just a little bit nice. It
Yeah.
pops in a way that I think a lot of Euro games avoid. They kind of go muted and drab and try and hit sort of a weird sort of realism. This is it's vibrant and fun, and I think that's what kind of sparked that negative voice in the back of my head that thought, well, maybe it's super simple as well.
I kind of had the same first impression as you, Brandon. I thought Oh, okay. Another worker placement game with a twist and some nice art. Okay, like every other game in the BGG hotness, right?
Add it to the pile.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly my first impression. And when I got to play it, it's just everything in this game is so pleasurable. It's so charming. It's hard to deny how much fun it is to just play through. It's really neat. It's really neat in a number of ways, which I hope to unpack. But I'm really glad we started with the art and the theme because one of the things I absolutely love about the sort of artwork and the theme is it's got this kind of weird semi realism, but also semi fantasy, right? There's like fantastical creatures, which isn't really represented in the gameplay a lot, I don't think, but there's these like fantastical creatures, and I like that it's not real. I like that we're not stealing artifacts from colonial countries, right?
Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
Yep.
there are too many of these games, and I like that this just went off in a different direction. This could have very easily been themed that way, and I don't think anyone would have said anything. You know, we've had loads of games like that before. I really like that this went in a slightly different, more fantastical approach. I thought that was a part of its charm.
That's a really, really good point. Like, I hadn't even really kind of considered that, but that sidestepping of reality in both the art and the iconography and just everything about the game and the monsters, especially, I think it really does make the game not problematic, which is a bit of a relief for us.
Yes, it is.
But also, just it kind of lets you have fun and let your imagination run wild a little bit. It's nice not being so tethered to reality and when you're playing a board game.
Yeah, I got a little bit. I got some vibes of Indiana Jones, but if Indiana Jones had been imagined by, I don't know, Thomas Kincaid, the cheesy greeting card painter who's famous for like his overuse of sunset style lighting and that sort of thing. I mean,
Mm,
it's got that
Yeah.
kind of vibrant fantasy vibe, and in some cases it is a little outlandish, especially, and we may talk about this later, but the upcoming campaign, which I've been a playtester for the last few weeks, adds kind of piles on that wild element, the fantasy element. So I don't know, I like the vibe this has. It's different from anything else in my collection.
yes,
So
yes, for sure. I really can't wait to hear about the upcoming campaign. I saw it mentioned in the rulebook and went, a campaign, when it had a look coming soon.
yeah, it's quite good.
Yeah. And then Noel mentioned that you had a hand in playtesting that.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to play test it for the last few weeks, and it has some significant twists on the base game, which is great. But the base game itself is, in my opinion, already pretty fascinating from a mechanical standpoint as well as a thematic standpoint. So I was really pleased to see that they were trying to experiment with it and take it in different directions.
Yeah, so let's unpack the mechanics a little bit more. To me, playing Lost Ruins, it very much the focus on your turn is a lot resource management, right? You feel like when you're playing it kind of links to the theme of the game. It feels like you're sort of scraping by with nothing all the time. Like you look at your pitiful hand of five cards, your two lonely workers that you get every round, and there's no way to get more. This is a worker placement game where you
Right.
have two workers for the entire game. So every turn, you're going to place 10 workers in total if you place them all. And placing them costs cards from your hand and also sometimes resources as well. So you're always sort of scraping by, but everything you do just ignites a sort of trade almost. You go to the place for a card and your worker, and you get something back, and that's something you then invest somewhere else, and then that might give you something back, and eventually it all sort of trickles down and diminishes. So you actually are out now. You are officially spent everything you can. But it's lovely that the whole time throughout the game you're kind of pulling yourself along and bartering and just trying to make that one coin turn into one of those arrowheads, and that one arrowhead turn into some research, and it's wonderful.
Yep.
Did you guys find it the same?
Definitely, definitely. I think when I said this game is pleasurable and charming, that is a big part of it because when you said you feel like you're scraping by, I feel like that feeling doesn't last very long. So somewhere around round three, you've got this kind of engine going where you've bought a couple of good cards, you've culled a couple of bad ones, and you're really cooking on gas, and things are really clicking. and you have that chain of this endless chain of resource conversion into resource conversion into resource conversion, finally into points, and then start again and do it next round as well. It's if that doesn't sound fun to you, then you probably won't like the game, to be fair, because that is the game.
I totally agree. When I first tried to explain this game to a friend that I was going to play with two-player, I was trying to I started to say, "Well, it's a worker placement game." And then I thought, "Well, I mean, kind of, but you only place 2 workers per round for 5 rounds. That's not much of a worker placement game." It's a deck building game, but you don't add that many cards to your deck, really. And it's really the resource management that's at the heart of the game, because what this game reminds me of the most, and I don't know if you all have played it, but is Gone Sean Clever. Have you all played it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It gives me that same feeling of comboing in ways that surprise me as a player while I'm
Yes.
playing it. Yeah, and I start I start the turn like you said. I've got a handful of cards. I've got 1 money and 1 compass token, and it's like make hay with this. Try to see what you can what you can come up with. And by the end of your first turn, you don't get to do that much. But like you said, Norm, by the end of your third turn, I feel like I'm running out of resources, and my turn's about to end. And then I realize, no, wait, if I climb the research track here, I'll get 2 more compass tokens, and then I can go explore here, and that'll give me more resources. And if I don't know, it keeps things build on one another in ways that are so surprising and delightful, and it makes me feel way smarter than I am.
Oh,
And that's
yeah.
one of my favorite things about the game. I don't maybe I mean, Carter and I talked about this in the show sometimes, but I feel like there are 2 main classes of Euro. One where they say, here's an abundance of riches. Figure out how to focus yourself and narrow down so that you can make points by the end, or else you'll end up having done a little bit of everything, but you don't have any points. Or there's the early Stefan Feld style that says you have nothing and you'll never get anything, and and make what you can out of that. And I love both of those, but they both have their faults. Like in those really restrictive games, I feel like I never get to really let my engine go.
Mm,
And in the ones where I just have everything I want, I never feel that crunch that I want to feel. And this game does both.
Mm,
I feel like it gives you so little to work with, but then by the end of that third round, you get to really start to fire all these things you've been building up for the whole game
mm.
in a way that just that's what I want from a Euro these days. That's what I'm after. Do you all feel that way at all?
yeah, and it does it all in what, 30 minutes? Would you say for a
Yeah.
solo
It's
game?
so quick.
Yeah, it's really breezy.
It's a game that, like you said, it makes you feel way smarter than you are, and it has these. Obviously, you personally, Brandon, not me.
Right, sure.
I'd say it accurately represents how smart you are in the game. That's how it makes me feel anyway.
and modest too.
Yes.
But yeah, you have these crunchy decisions. You have this really nice arc where your engine finally runs. And I'll come on to how the design of the game enables this. But yeah, absolutely. It does all of that. And it does it all when you're playing solo in about 30 minutes. And that to me that's exciting. That's really, really exciting.
Yeah, there aren't many games in my collection that give me that feeling in that amount of time.
Just wanted to pick up on that point you said there, Brandon, about the types of Euro, because I think this game, it feels like it separates itself from a lot of conventions. It's not your typical deck builder, in the sense that for a typical deck builder, you tend to find, or at least I've tended to find, that you add lots and lots of cards to your deck and cycle through loads and loads and loads and just try and make this big bloated powerful thing, or maybe streamline it a little bit, but essentially just make this big powerhouse of a deck. It's not that. The deck is kind of slapdash and haphazard. You've just picked up what you can, and you only see each card 1 or 2 or maybe 3 times if you're lucky that you've added to your deck. It doesn't feel like you see them very often, even if you try hard to get them. But when you do, it's exciting and it's fun and it feels nice. There are some really neat little twists on it as well. Like there are 2 different cards that you add to your deck: artifacts and items. Items go into the bottom of your deck, and importantly, that kind of puts them above every card you've played that turn, which is a nice little twist to get them up quicker. Artifacts are even more interesting because you immediately play them, which is not something you see very often in deck builders at all. When you buy a card, it goes to the discard pile, right? not in Lost Ruins. And so that's very exciting and powerful. But those cards you have to pay for the next time they come back up in your deck if you want to use them again. And all of this is to say that that's just one aspect of the game, the deck builder side of it. And it's different, it's unusual, it's unexpected, it's refreshing for the three of us who are so familiar with such conventions in board games to come across a game that kind of bucks tradition in the different ways it plays. I hinted earlier about the worker placement. You get 2 workers. It feels wild to people who've played worker placement games where you keep buying more workers and then adding more workers to your thing, and every turn you just play more and more workers progressively to make yourself more powerful. It's wonderful. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but I really wanted to sort of highlight that about Lost Ruins, and for me, it's what makes it so special is that it has a really unique identity in its use of traditional mechanics and its divergence from the way you traditionally see them.
And I think that's why this game stuck out to me and why I wanted to talk about it primarily, because I think, at least for me, I'm kind of a jaded gamer at this point on at a certain level where I think, oh, I want to see something new. I want to encounter some novel mechanism I've
Mm,
never seen before. And this game doesn't do that really. I mean, it worker placement has been done to death. Deck building has been done to death. I mean, we've seen these mechanisms so many times. Resource management, my goodness, but that they tweak all of each of those 3 aspects is tweaked in a significant way, or at least a number of small ways that make it feel really exciting to me.
mm.
It's not totally novel, but it is the result of so many iterations on these mechanics that we get to see this really polished, beautiful kind of, I'm not going to say end product because people will tweak this further in the future, but this is a game that stands on the shoulders of so many other games that we really benefit from it. So I just think, like you said, the buying the items and putting them at the bottom of your deck, brilliant. I mean, how many times have you bought something in a deck builder and then because of just the randomness of shuffling the whole deck, you may not see it again for a good long while, right?
Yeah, and the deck's so small in Lost Ruins, so it's next turn you're
Right.
getting that card. If not this turn, if you
Yeah.
because I've had times when my deck's run out and I've bought a card and then done something to draw a card. Oh, that makes me feel clever. And then I've got that card immediately and I can play it that turn. It's yeah, it's wild.
And I think you're hitting on something that I wanted to bring up, Brandon, which is the elegance of the design. You know, you're saying that because of all these iterations on these mechanisms that we all know and love already, you end up with something very polished and I would say elegant. And Scruffy, you brought up the deck building and the way the 2 cards work. One of my absolute favorite things about the design is the way in which you track the rounds also alters what's available in the market
Mm,
in a way that's just so lovely. So Scruffy said that artifacts they tend to be more powerful and you get to use them as soon as you buy them. Now what's interesting is you start the game with only 1 artifact in the market. That's one artifact available. But then as the rounds progress, what you do is you move this staff, it's a round tracker. And when you move it, all the cards to the left now become artifacts. So by the time you finish the game in your last turn, you're going to have 4 artifacts and only 1 item. Now, the lovely thing about that is if you buy an item, there's a very good chance by the time you're on that round that you're not going to see that card. So now the market is full of cards that have that instant use. And it's just, that's so clever. That's
mm.
so smart. It's brilliant, really. It's brilliant and it's elegant.
That's pretty clever.
Oh, yes, yes.
That might be the nerdiest joke I've ever made.
I really think that that I totally agree about the round tracker, and really that's the kind of design sensibility that's at the heart of a lot of this game, where a round tracker is not just a round tracker; it changes the market. Same thing with the artifact cards that you mentioned. Yes, they are instant. You can instantly play them and get the benefits of them. But if they do come up in the future, you've got to pay to use
Hmm.
them. And you know
Yes.
what? Resources are tight in this game, and I've got a lot of other uses for those tablets than these artifact cards. And I think that is so clever. There's that instant gratification, but later you will pay for it. And that kind of even the fact that you're deck building with multi-use cards, my goodness. I mean, it's the same sort of design sensibility that I think you see there in simple things like the round tracker.
I've just had a lovely little revelry as well. That I really love that the game also encourages you to get the artifacts, because one of the only resources you can get two of when you place a worker is the tablets. There's kind of a weird hierarchy with the way the resources work. There are only really five: gold, exploration tokens, tablets, arrowheads, and rubies. And golden exploration tokens are kind of their own thing. They're your currency for exploring the map and adding cards to your deck. The other three are mainly used for defeating monsters and the research. And tablets are kind of the easiest to get. Arrows are the second easiest, and then the jewels are kind of the hardest to get. But the tablets, when you get them, when you go to spend your worker, the sort of basic spot, you get two of them. So it kind of gives you that little incentive then. You're just stacking up on tablets, you know. Maybe you could pick up an artifact and maybe you'd have a tablet handy to spend on it later on, you know, because often the granularity works such that when you're investing in them in the resource track, you're only spending one at a time. There are spaces that require two of them. It's cleverly balanced and designed like that. But it's a really nice sort of incentive that you're, as a player, sat there and you say, well, those cost tablets, but I can get tablets easy.
Right.
I mean, but there's a lovely counter incentive there as well, and I think Brandon was hinting at this, that yes, you only need one. You may only need one to research, but the thing is, there are two things. There are two parts of your research. There's the magnifying glass, which always has to move up the research track first, and then there's the book, which can only be equal to or further back than your magnifying glass. So yes, you have two, and you may only need one. But guess what? You could use that to move your book, and you'll get another reward for doing that instead. So there's a kind of counter incentive there, where what Brandon was saying. You know what? Actually, there are more things I could be using this tablet for. Is this card worth it? And it's really those kind of decisions are throughout the game constantly.
And not only that, but you can only get assistants, for instance, at least on one of the boards, you can only get them with your notebook, you know,
Hmm.
and if you get an assistant earlier in the game, then you've got a little, just a small little bonus that you can trigger every round to give you, for instance, more tablets or more money or more compasses. And so there's a strong incentive to double down on spending those extra resources, not on an artifact card. You can afford that later, right? Move the notebook, get up there and get yourself an assistant. There are just so many things competing for your attention that that's where the crunch comes in. I love it.
Oh, I think that's the real joy of this game is it is entirely, every design choice is focused around player choice and agency. It
Mhm.
empowers you constantly. There aren't any wrong answers. You start off and you look and you go, I could do anything here. It's really exciting. I've got this arrowhead. Maybe I'll spend that to move up on the research track. But hang on, because I've just explored this place. That monster needs an arrowhead to defeat. Which one should I do? And the choice you make has an impact on the rest of your game. And
Yes.
I don't know the right answers most of the time. I don't know if there is a right answer. But that is just inherently fun. That's what we want from a board game, right?
Absolutely.
Well, it's certainly what I want. Yeah, absolutely. We spoke a little bit about how the deck building is different. We've explained how the market works. We've explained how the purchasing of cards work. Can we unpack the worker placement a little bit? We've said how there's
Mhm.
two, but Scruffy, you hinted there about exploring, because this is something that I don't see very often. In that the game starts with only five worker placement spots available.
Yes, yes. So yeah, you get real choice here, don't you, with what you do with your workers? Do you just go to an already uncovered site or explore a new one?
Yeah, absolutely. So across the board, there are places where you can send your workers to explore if you can pay with exploration tokens and with the correct movement cards. If you're able to do this, you will get a bonus, which will provide you with an effect and points at the end of the game, which is cool. But also reveal a new worker placement spot, which is permanently now going to be on the board and available for any player, or in solo, yourself or your rival, to be able to go to. I don't know. Maybe this is just me showing my ignorance, but I don't know any other worker placement game that works that way. Brandon, is this something you've seen before?
That's a good question. The only thing, and I'm speaking in total ignorance here because I've not actually played it, but I kind of wonder if Great Western Trail does something similar, or I know Maracaibo does a little bit, where you kind of uncover these different locations around the board. But that's essentially a rondel game, not really
Mhm.
a worker placement game. I can't think of anything else. And what's so remarkable to me about this uncovering new locations is you have the ability, especially after you've got a few locations out on the board, you've got the ability to make an informed decision about where to put your worker. I know if I go to this spot that's already been discovered on the board, I know I'll get these resources.
Mm.
But I could go and discover a new site, and the incentive for doing that is number one, like I could get, if it's a higher level site than what's available to me right now, I'll get more stuff. I may not get to choose specifically what I want, but I bet I can do something with it, right?
Yes.
But then you also get these idols for discovering a new site, and the idols are one of my favorite things about this game. It's so clever because once you've gotten them, you can choose to later in on a future turn or whenever you want to spend them, cover up potential in-game victory points, an increasing number of in-game victory points, and get resources. Resources that maybe are hard for you to get, because other spots are blocked and you can't get to the resources you need, or maybe you just need one ruby to move up one more space on the research track. It feels so good to be able to push one of those little tokens, those little idle tokens in and get the resource you need. And so it incentivizes you in multiple ways for discovering new sites, even though you don't know what resources you'll get there. I don't know. It feels like in some ways it's better. It's better to discover a new site than
In
to go
many
to an
ways, it is. It's an
existing one.
investment, isn't it? Because it always costs
Yeah.
exploration to go to a new place. But you're right; those little rune tokens—I don't know what they are, little idols—they are free victory points, blanket. So you're getting victory points. They have a immediate effect. They will always give you something back. So maybe they'll give you one of those exploration tokens back. Maybe they'll give you a gold, and you really needed gold actually, or whatever. Maybe they'll give you a deck thinning, trash a card, and that's perfect. I've got, because there are fear cards which we hinted at earlier on, and then like you said, Brandon, that you can slide them up as a wild card for whatever you want. One of an arrowhead, maybe a two of those tablets, whatever you need in that moment, and the temptation to use that the turn you get it is too big to not do, I find.
That's so
Have you
true.
ever ended a game with any of those slots left? You can do it 4 times in the game, incidentally. You can't, even if you get more idols, there's only 4 slots to do that. And like you say, it costs you more victory points every time you do. But God, it's tempting.
Yeah, I do it every time. I can't help myself. And, and I just think that's so clever. And it's also more expensive to discover those new sites.
Mhm.
I mean, you have to pay those icons from the cards in your hand to place a worker just like you would normally, which you mentioned earlier. But then you also still have to pay a bunch of compasses to go and explore also.
Yeah.
It's not a cheap proposition.
Yes. So what you said earlier, Norm, is you said you pay in movement cards. Now, here's another great example of this choice in the game. Every card is a movement card, and they all have different symbols on them. One of 3 different symbols, well, 4 if you include the useless one. So the 4 symbols are boots, cars, boats, and planes. Planes are the best, they can be used as any. Boats and cars are equally good, but some places require boats, some places require cars, and boots can only be used, and they're only on the fear cards, I think. They can only be used to take you to one of the basic campsite spaces that are available at the start of the game, and on the reverse side of the board, because Brandon, you hinted at earlier, there are 2 sides to this board. Some other spaces want you to have boots, so there's a bit more sort of flexibility there, but usually they are kind of worse overall. And bring this back to choice here. So you have that lovely choice of, do I use this coin card for a coin, a free coin, or do I use it to explore somewhere?
And of course, you say free coin because a lot of cards, and especially ones you start with, are quick actions in that they don't count towards your main action. So that's again another lovely way to enable you to do things because these cards are not going to be as powerful as the cards you get later. But sometimes all you need is that one extra coin. And that's perfect. That's so lovely. And the way the interplay between the deck building and the worker placement is like it's not just that the deck building's interesting and the worker placement's interesting. It's also the point at which they meet is interesting as
Mhm.
well. And that's so unique. So unique.
It is because those two workers go so fast. You don't have to place them every round. And I have found rounds where I don't place them because I just have other things I need to do. But if it feels like you never quite get enough, two is not very much. But one of the things I love about this game is that you can buy cards, and this is where that interplay comes in that you mentioned, Norm. You can buy cards that let you move your worker to another spot.
Oh, yeah.
That
Yeah.
is when you get one of those, that is game changing. At least it felt that way for me because not only can you take essentially a third worker placement action, but also let's say you discover a new site. And one of the things that we've talked around a little bit is that when you discover a new site, you also encounter one of these monsters, a guardian on that space. And you can pay resources to get rid of that guardian and get 5 points. And 5 points is it's a good chunk of points in this game. But sometimes you don't have it, or you've got other stuff you want to do and you need to do more quickly, especially if you're trying to race up the research track or something. And if you stay there at the end of the round, you're going to get a fear card, which isn't the end of the world, but also not great. It clogs up your deck, it gives you negative points. If you've got one of those cards that says you can move to another location, I'll just leave that spot behind. I'll leave the monster behind. I'll get rid of any potential fear that would come into my deck. I just think that the intersection of those two things is so interesting.
For sure. And I mean, you can use that movement to go and fight a monster because they are worth killing. That's 5 points there. So if you've sent your worker somewhere that doesn't have a monster and there's a monster that was left last turn or whatever lying around, you could use that card and go and chase that monster as well as the 5 points. They also have a little bonus on them as well. Some of them are you can use as a movement. Some of them will give you a card, all sorts of things. Similarly to the idols that we mentioned earlier. And I think this sort of grabbing those sort of little resources is something that every Eurogamer knows about, those little extra bonuses or what we kind of live to find. And in Ruins, that is where the competition really kind of comes in. And it remains even in a solo game because the rival is specifically focused to try and steal spots from you. We all know that that's what a worker placement game is about. It's about getting those extra little bonuses first. On the research track, they're littered across. If you move your magnifying glass up there first, you get the extra little bonus one exploration, which is, of course, everything we work for as Eurogamers. And no way am I missing out on that one little bonus because I'll have to go there eventually and I want to be there first. So you're trying to prioritize that the whole way through, and that is the main conflict of the game.
And I think, but one of the things I like about this game is that I feel like I have the freedom to focus on those interesting points of
Yeah.
competition. And because this game avoids what I consider to be two of the major pitfalls of worker placement games, which are feed your workers, which I despise with a burning passion of 1,000 suns. I really hate it.
Mhm.
And also, it does not give you the option for getting more workers, which has always, to me, and I'm sure people could argue against this, always feels like kind of a non-choice
Mm.
because in almost every game, it's better to get the workers. If you can build early in the game extra actions, why wouldn't you do that? The fact that this game doesn't let you worry about either of those things to me feels like I've got the freedom to focus on really competing on the things that matter, or not just the things that matter, the things that are exciting to compete on, including in the solo game with the AI.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense, and I'm glad you said it about the common pitfalls of worker placement games because it's something I've always thought. Why wouldn't you get more workers? There are some games which push against that in what at first appear to be interesting ways. Like well, Scythe isn't a worker placement game, but for example, in Scythe, the more workers you have, the the more costly it is to produce with them. So you think, okay, that's a very interesting choice. But once you play the game 3 or 4 times, you know where the sweet spot is.
Yep.
So now it's a non-choice again, just the same as the games that you were referring to. So yeah, I'm glad you said it because yeah, in any game where you can get more workers, it's normally the done thing to do. And if it's not, then there's normally a sweet spot which isn't very difficult to find. It feels very ham fisted. This game just doesn't even try to solve that problem. It says you've got to make it work. And I love that.
I'm listening to you guys talking, and I'm getting the vibe that you have a very similar sort of play style to me and enjoy this game for the same sort of reasons I do, which is that it is very, very much a opportunistic tactical player's playground, right? I think that's fair to
Yes.
say. Do you guys find that it is lacking in strategy and allowing you to have a sort of long-term plan? I'm using obviously tactical and strategy here very loosely. We've talked about that in other episodes. Or do you find that there is still a nice enough sort of level of forward planning in the game? I'm not saying it's necessarily a damning criticism to say that it might not have much in the way of long grand strategy and be much more focused on the sort of, as I've already mentioned, day to day, trying to just make what you can out of nothing sort of experience. Because obviously it does that wonderfully. I was just curious what you two think of that.
Yes, I'm actually really glad you brought it up because I had the same thoughts. I don't think it's a problem. In fact, I actually think it's one of the things that I like the most about the game. After I played it a few times, I figured that there's always a similar arc. This is quite a tightly designed game. It has a similar arc every time you play, and I feel like you score a similar amount of points
Yeah.
as well. The difference is how you get there. And that's determined by some of the random elements, like the market of cards that are available, the way in which they're going to become available in your deck. The explored sites are always going to be vastly different every time. The combination of sites with monsters is going to be different every time. Those things are what makes the game interesting to keep coming back to. The fact that there isn't a way to solve this or have a long term strategy, I don't think that's a bad thing at all because if I'm honest, if it didn't have those like unpredictable elements that make it such a tactical game, I think I'd be sitting here saying that I don't like it because it has a similar arc every time because you score a similar amount of points every time. If it also didn't have that unpredictability, I don't think I'd be as positive about it as I am being right now, to be perfectly honest.
Here's what I would say to that. I think if you'd asked me earlier in my board gaming life if I liked that it's mostly tactical and not so much strategic, I would have said no. I liked the grand strategic element of games back then. Nowadays, I don't know if it's because I have kids and I don't have enough brain power left at the end of the day or what, but I just tactical games, I play strategic games tactically primarily. And that's I don't it's more fun for me to respond in the moment to what's going on and just use what I've got. You mentioned the word opportunistic. That describes the tactics in this game perfectly. My Machiavellian side, I guess, wants to go in there and just seize whatever opportunities are in front of me, and that's where I find enjoyment. Now, in the future, I think if you want strategic gameplay, I think the campaign offers that, and we may get to that in just a minute, but there are the way the different chapters are structured in the campaign without giving anything away, it gives you much more of a focus as something that you need to accomplish outside of the typical goals for a game of Lost Ruins of Arnak, which to me says, okay, I'm going to spend the whole game working toward this end. That gives me more of a strategic feeling than I'm used to in the normal game. I would also just personally love to see some asymmetric player powers in this game at some point. I think that this game could really benefit from it, and in almost every case, I think those usually drive a strategic mindset
Yeah.
because you've got something you can exploit for the entire game.
Yeah, I mean, it would be
Mhm.
difficult to do that in its current iteration and not make it feel prescribed or railroady. An interesting sort of, I guess, step towards that in some ways in terms of sort of prescribing your actions. And I kind of have a love hate relationship with the mini expansion and the objectives that come out of that. Because I started off with using those, and I think it's a really good way to start out playing the game. But the more I played, the more I got annoyed at having to do things in a sort of set order. As I mentioned in the intro, the way they work is you have 5 objective kind of cards that you flip 3 over of every round, and then the rival takes their turn. If they achieve one of them, you reshuffle it. So they can't just take one straight away, which is quite nice. But they are first to do a thing, first to buy an item, first to buy an artifact, whatever it is. And if you beat them, you just deny them 2 points. If they beat you, they get 2 points. It's that simple. But that kind of gives you focus right from turn one of like, okay, so I need to lay all my workers out first, be the first to move my magnifying glass up, be the first to buy an item card. That's what I've got to do this turn if I don't want them to get points. And you kind of know the chances of what they might draw in their deck when you get a bit more familiar with it. But bringing that back to sort of the choice, then, does it detract from how much choice you have, which is the kind of joy of this game? And would asymmetric powers do the same thing? I'm doing a norm here and asking questions that I don't have an answer to necessarily, but
Is that doing a norm? I didn't know that was doing a norm.
yeah, that's doing a norm.
Oh, I'm glad I know.
I think I would still enjoy it because yes, I think it can be a little railroady, but to me that just if I want to play a game where I think this is the kind of game where I wouldn't play with them all the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Most
Yes.
of the time when I am not playing with an asymmetric player power in a game like Eclipse, which I've mentioned before because it's one of my favorite games, if I'm playing the humans who have no particular power, I'm just making my game experience less interesting. I don't think that would be the case here. I think you would just, if you want a little more focus or if you just want to change things up, I think that would be a cool way to do it in this game. Or same with the objectives. If you want a little more focus, that's not the sort of thing I'd play with every time, but
yeah,
sometimes.
I think we've spent a lot of time talking about the rival and how the AI works, but I think we should look to unpack that for our listeners. How does it work? What do we like about it? What do we think of the solo mode compared to the multiplayer mode? Because this is essentially a multiplayer game with a solo mode, right?
Yes.
I mostly think that this AI is perfectly serviceable. It's perfectly serviceable and it does a lot of things that I like about AIs. Namely, that it doesn't take very long to resolve its turn and its action. Brilliant. Fantastic. It's reasonably competitive, although I would say I've started to find it somewhat easier, even on some of the hardest difficulties
really.
towards the end of the podcast. Playing for the podcast. Yeah, unfortunately, it has variable difficulty, which is great. But there are some elements where I feel it kind of falls down and is not as fun as the multiplayer experience. And Brandon, you gave a really good example on those item cards that allow you to move your workers. What's interesting there is that you explained one interesting decision, which is, oh, I'm at a site with a monster that I can't kill. That's fine. I can move my worker. When you're playing multiplayer, when you remove a worker, that opens that spot up for somebody else. Now, if the rival goes there, because they don't collect any resources, it doesn't matter. That is one less thing for you to consider. And that's only a very small part, but the AI certainly it doesn't have to worry about resources, doesn't have to worry about paying for cards, it doesn't have to worry about even playing cards. And I think that's great because it makes it very simple, but in some ways, you kind of miss out on the solo experience slightly. What do you think? I think people are going to hate me for saying that, but what do you guys think?
So I've got a lot to say about that. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there, and a lot of stuff I kind of take issue with. I think it's a really good AI. I love how low maintenance it is, but I also love that, especially if you use the objective cards, it does kind of make you consider it almost in the same way you'd consider a player. You look at those objectives, and it's the same as when you look across at the player and you go, what are they working towards? What do we need to get in before they do? You know, but even without those, you look at the research track and you see where their magnifying glass is, and you think, I want to get that next bonus on the research track tile. I need to push my magnifying glass this turn and get there first, because you know they're in their deck, they can move it up potentially 2 times a turn. Always one, maybe two, depending on other things they do. And so you are forced to sort of react to the stuff you expect them to do in the same way you might expect another player to do stuff. I also want to just quickly hit on variable difficulty there, because you said that you're finding it easy. The way it works in this is there are, I think, 5 cards that are always the same in the AI's deck, and 5 green cards that you can sub out for red cards to make them harder. And you can sub as many of those out as you want, which is, oh, lovely little bit of variability there. I don't know if you know this, Norm, but the mini expansion actually adds 5 purple
Ooh
cards.
la la.
So this is a kind of critique that I think that Mean and Elwyn have responded to directly in their mini expansion. That people have said, I can do it now. It's a breeze. I'm a pro. And if you're hitting that point already, Norm, maybe you should have a look at adding those purple cards in instead. They're essentially one step higher. And again, you could play with any amount of those. You could have two greens, a purple, and two reds, whatever you want to do, and make that really fun and difficult and not know what action they're going to be really powerful of until you see it come up in the game. So I love that about the AI. I love the variable difficulty there.
I totally agree. I have to say I have played with all 5 reds in there, and I have come close to beating it, but not quite. I think I'm just worse at this game than other people, and one of the ways I know that I am is because I never seem to get, like, the notebook up more than 3 or 4 spaces on the research track.
Oh, really?
I just struggle to do it, and I think it's because I just get sidetracked by other things that I think are more fun and interesting. But, and that may be speaking to my own lack of ability, but I think the difficulty for me is very good. Also, this is the kind of AI nowadays that I want. And when I was listening to your Anachrony review, which is one of my favorite games, brilliant game, and I want also one of my favorite AIs. One of the things that you all said it was it almost apologizes for being there, which I was sitting in my car when I heard it, and I said, "Oh, that's one of my favorite things about it." I love quick to resolve, simple AIs. But that said, something like the AIs from Wingspan or Viticulture don't quite work for me, and I think the reason is that I don't yes, I love just flipping a card and resolving it, and it's super simple, but I don't feel like I ever know quite what's coming because what's on those cards changes from round to round. What's nice about this is that there are so few actions in that deck. I know after my first couple of games, I knew what it had left. I knew what the chances were that it was going to take the spot that I needed, and I really like that. I like games or AIs, I should say, that are dead simple, but that do grow with you a little bit, or at least your understanding of them grows in a way that makes engaging with them a little more interesting. And so it's kind of a memory element, which is not going to work for everybody. But for me, it really works. It's simple, it's competitive, seems to take the stuff that I want at just the wrong time,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and takes no time to learn or resolve. Brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, and it has a really simple tiebreaker as well, right? I love how that works. You flip a card, and then if it's a tie, you look at the AI's deck, and it says rightmost or leftmost. Simple, easy. I do like it, and I know I appeared critical, but I am overall a big fan of the AI. I think it does a lot of things really well. We had Steve Schleppers, who designed the fan made Toma for Great Western Trail, and is also designing the solo mode for Cellulose, which I think is on Kickstarter at the moment. And they went into a lot of detail about what makes a good AI, and this ticks a lot of those boxes. I was kind of doing a checklist of that as I was playing, and this ticks almost all of the boxes. I think Steve's in our Discord, so he can probably tell me why I'm wrong later on. But for sure, I felt like agree with both of you that in many ways this is a really really fun AI, and I don't think it would be the fun 30-minute game that we've all praised it for if it was more in depth, if it did try to solve the problems that I highlighted earlier. So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and just going to that point of Anachrony's AI feeling apologetic, I really like that this AI feels like a jerk. And the special sort of jerk that fits the theme perfectly because they are your rival and they always get there first. They always act first. And it just feels like if this is not the most typical sort of ruins exploring archaeologist trope of that pompous, horrible rival being there first, already taking home the golden idol, where you have to slink back into your camp and work out how are we going to do this? What clever plan are we going to come up with? We needed that spot. They've taken it. What are we going to do? They took it turn one. I knew they would. And then later in the game, it happens as well. I had my first game, the final round. I had a choice. I saw the choice coming. It was I either invest now and try and get both of those 11-point tiles, or I don't go that heavy on generating those resources and I do some more exploration and some other fun stuff. And I thought, no, I'm going to try and do it. And the rival did something that there was a 50-50 chance of on the last two cards for them to do. If they did the one, I'd get it. If they did the other thing, I wouldn't get it, and they did the other thing. I think those moments are lovely, and those little sort of dramas that come out and about from that, and from it specifically being your rival. What a simple choice to call it your rival. Yes, it is.
It gives me big Pokemon vibes calling it the
Yeah,
rival.
Gary O.
This is Gary, who's always one step ahead of you.
Yes.
Definitely, yes.
I kind of
great
wish they'd
analogy.
drawn him. I wish they'd drawn him and given him a name like
Oh, I'd hate him even more.
Sir Farnsworth of whatever.
Farnsworth.
Damn you, Farnsworth. Maybe I'll draw him for myself.
Please do. Can I make just a couple of remarks on the campaign before we kind of... Okay, so I don't have any interest in giving anything away here, but I just to set expectations a bit, because I had none going in. There are 4 different games in the campaign, which when I first heard about it, I thought, oh, only 4. You know, what is that even a campaign? But you know what? I think I've just realized I'm pretty much over campaigns, because I'm never, especially long and involved ones, I'm never going to get to finish them. And so, you know, Bloodborne does this in the new Bloodborne board game, where their campaigns are only 3 games long. I think that's really a kind of a sweet spot for me, and where it feels like there is a little bit of a story to this campaign. You can carry over 1 or 2 things from game to game, but it's not so much that it feels like it's a lot to upon teardown, that you have to set aside a lot of components for future play. Doesn't feel like that, but it does develop an interesting story, and the way it plays with the main mechanisms of the game will really surprise you. And that's all I feel like I can say. It really shocked me how bold they were in the way they chose to switch the basic mechanics of the game up, and I think people are going to be really pleased with it. I also discovered in the playtesting, and I haven't playtested this part of it, but there will be an app for solo play to drive the AI instead of the tiles, which isn't that big a deal given how few components there are for the AI. But at present, the purple cards that you mentioned, Scruffy, are only available as a print and play, which is a little annoying to me, because the tiles, the tiles are nice thick tiles for the AI, and then I've got these print and play things that I've inserted here that don't quite mesh. This will mix all of those in on the app, so you can choose your difficulty in the app and not have to worry about the difference in components. So really nice. So I think people should be excited for this. It's really interesting stuff.
That all sounds amazing. I should say I've played the game on Tabletop Simulator, the table by Sploos. I think it was the table I used. Its scripting works really well for solo play, and so yeah. But I absolutely intend to get a physical copy of this game at some point, because I can imagine feeling the tactility of those tiles in the game it takes it to a whole nother level, I imagine, just from how they look
Absolutely.
on Tabletop Sim.
Yeah, and Brandon, I'm glad you got to that point about the satisfaction of actually completing a campaign for once, because yeah, I'm right there with you at the moment. I see a campaign board game and I think, no,
Yep.
like I'm being honest with myself now. I don't have the time. I don't have the time investment, and even if I thought I did, I know I'd be wrong. Like, because
Yep.
I don't even know how many unfinished campaign board games I have. And we spoke about this a little bit in our last episode. There's something really satisfying about a story that comes to an end, and being able to say, yes, this story had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And look what I did. Look what experience I had when I played through the whole campaign. And yeah, just if that's only 3 or 4 sessions, that's fine. Like, it's better to have an end than play 3 or 4 sessions of a 15 to 20 campaign. I completely agree.
Is it replayable, the campaign mode for Lost Ruins, or is it a one shot?
I think I would say it's replayable, because at least as I understood it, and I wasn't playing with a finished version of the app, so a lot of things about the app didn't work quite right. But it seems like the different story cards that you pull in the game, when you reach story moments or story markers in the game, there's a deck of them. I think 10 cards per chapter, and I didn't make it through all of those cards.
Mhm.
So that I found that to be interesting. I also think I would think of playing through the campaign as like playing with similar to playing with the other side of the board. There, it just is a different way of playing Arnak,
Mhm.
and each chapter feels like a very different way of playing Arnak, and I like that. So I think for me, it will be replayable. I wouldn't play it all the time, but I definitely plan to revisit it again when it's released, and I've already played through it a couple of times now. So yeah, I think so.
That's interesting. I think, even if you're not seeing new story beats necessarily, you're not seeing new story beats when you play a board game anyway. It's only the
Right.
emergent narrative that changes. And you can still have emergent narrative in a campaign game. Of course you can. So, yeah, it does feel like from what you're saying there, obviously I haven't seen the campaign, can't really comment on it, but it does feel like that might work really well for that. And it would mean that when you get that end, you can play again another time, start a new story, and that's exciting, I think.
And I think because specifically with Arnak, because it's such a short game as well, what I'm quite excited for with the campaign is it takes what is already a crunchy and feels like a meaty and main course board game, and it can turn it into a whole evening experience where actually I've got a whole evening now. I could sit down and play through the whole campaign. And I've got that option. I think that's pretty cool. But also, if you don't have a whole evening, well, that's fine because is already so good in its current iteration. Just like you said, Brandon, it gives you that extra way to play. It can turn it into a whole evening's activity, much the same as those heavier games that we enjoy. I think that's pretty awesome.
I do too, and I really think that you mentioned the campaign games and the satisfaction of finishing something. There's a reason that Mansions of Madness, for instance, has stayed on my shelf when other games have gone. Kingdom Death didn't stay around in my collection. I think it's fascinating, but I'm never gonna finish that campaign. I know it.
So, yes, I think that's a brilliant time to move on now. I think we could absolutely unpack every individual. I really realized quite early on in this episode that each individual mechanic and aspect of the game is a mini essay in itself for Lost Ruins. I can see so much
Mm.
thought and consideration has gone into all of it. You pick up a card and you look at it and you go, look at that design. Oh my God. And for us as board game enthusiasts and deep, deep in the hobby, we were impressed by the thought in everything. But anyway, moving on. So we've got you here, Brandon. Let's talk a little bit more about things you're working on now. Anything you'd like to shout out to our listeners to make them aware of. Now's your chance.
Yeah, I think if for anybody who's interested, my gaming recently has been more in the world of role playing games.
Woo!
When the pandemic started, I've always loved role playing games, yeah, and I know you all certainly do. I've always loved them. I've never felt like I had time for them, and when the pandemic started, I'm I was looking for ways to spend time with my coworkers. I'm a minister at a church, like kind of a church of around 400 or 500 people, and my role on staff is, I do like preaching and pastoral visits and things like you would expect from a minister. But I'm also in charge of the staff, which has grown a fair amount, and that's the part of my job that I like the most. I like the people. I like working with them and spending time with them. And when the pandemic started, suddenly we're all working from home. These people I get to see day in and day out and enjoy their company very much. I'm not seeing. And so somebody said, I'd love for us to find ways to spend time together. Does anybody ever play Dungeons and Dragons? And I thought, is this my life that I'm about to lead a group of ministers through Dungeons and Dragons? Because that is what I want. I said, well, I've never DM'd before, but I played 3.5 back in the day in college and enjoyed it, and had played a couple sessions of 5e but hadn't spent much time in it. And I thought, you know what? Let's just do it. I'm going to go buy some 5e source books and dive into it, and had a lot of fun. We played through a year-long campaign every week
Wow.
through Roll20, which I am a big advocate for because I think it makes getting together a lot easier. And I have had so much fun, but I've realized a few things that maybe other people know. First of all, 5e is the most popular role playing game in the world, no question. It is not easy to get into for new players at all.
No.
It is super intimidating. And I realized that when I was hand holding a whole lot of people who'd never played a role playing game before. Also, their adventures are to put it delicately, hot garbage
Yeah.
for the most part. I mean, they're just a mess. There's some really interesting things in them, neat characters, neat moments, but a lot of it's just messy. And so I stumbled on to OSR games in the last year. Are you all familiar with OSR
Mhm.
RPGs?
Mm.
So this is it's old school Renaissance or old school revival where people take the things that are interesting about like first and second edition D&D, where things were much deadlier and relied much more on player wits and player choice than a predetermined plot line that players play through. And that to me has been an interesting discovery because there's also a strong emphasis on lean rule sets, easy to grasp rules, enough rules to get the game in your head, because that's where the game happens, and so you don't have to flip through. I mean, a single monster stat block in fifth edition can be half a page, uh, which boggles the mind.
Yeah.
So I decided, we've had fun playing. We're continuing to play. I'm currently running another 5e campaign in Andrew Kolb's Neverland setting, which is excellent if you've not checked it out. But I realized my players need more challenge because 5e is not designed to be deadly. So the rewards can feel greater on the other side. And they need something too that is easier for them to grasp. So I just started designing my own system. So that's what I'm working on now. I'm in the process of writing it for them, which is an interesting way to design. I've never done that before, but it's just born out of needs I saw in my players. And so, yeah, working on a system that I'm hoping will be quite lean, that you could print out in a zine type format, or maybe buy through a publisher like Exalted Funeral or some other OSR publisher. Yeah, and it's kind of like my chance to fix the things I don't like about RPGs. So that's how I'm viewing it currently. No attack rolls, for instance, because it's not fun to spend your turn rolling a die only to not attack or not be able to do
Mm.
anything.
Yeah.
Lots of character class options, like 100 is the goal,
Oof.
that are not so fleshed out as the 5e character options. So it definitely is something that draws inspiration from Troika, if you're familiar with that. Into the Odd, Electric Bastion Land, Murkborg. Are you familiar with these?
Electric Bastion Land, that's the game where you don't roll to hit, you roll for damage, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, when you were explaining what you didn't like about combat in D&D 50, that was one of the games that jumped straight into my head. So yeah, I can see the
Yeah.
influence there.
Yeah, it's so good, but it's so tied to a steampunk type setting that it doesn't work for most of the kind of games I would run. But yeah, rolling just for damage makes combat zippy compared to 5e, where it can kind of drag on for too long, in my opinion. I've had whole sessions that were a single fight.
A lot of missed turns, isn't there?
Yeah, and that's not fun.
Clunky.
Yeah. So that's coming. I'm in the writing and playtesting phase now, tentatively calling it Quest,
Nice.
just to keep things nice and simple. But I would love, at some point in the future, I'd love to take that public if it goes over well with my players. If it doesn't, then it'll go in the bin. So
As soon as you're ready to share it with the world at large, we would love to
yeah.
get a link to it or whatever. Send it over to us, and we'll share it in our Discord. Since we've started branching out to RPGs with the Ironsworn episode and things. We've got a whole little channel in our Discord for RPG where I'm sure people would love to check it out and yeah, give it a try. Yeah, a massive thank you for coming on and giving us so much support when we started. We mentioned this before in other episodes, I think, but your sort of comment on social media, I can't remember where it was, really was a massive boon to us. It was really inspiring, and it made us both feel really keyed up and vindicated. It was a really lovely thing of you to do as kind of the big shot superstar, taking your time out to be like, hey guys, check out these nobodies. They're actually all right.
Well, I'm glad. I have enjoyed the show from the beginning, and just thrilled to have the chance to come on here and chat with you all. While I'm here, I'll just give us a small plug too. To Solosaurus still exists, even though I'm not part of it anymore. Martin Gonzalez and Michael Eckenfels lead it now, and they have quite a different style from what Carter and I had, but I quite enjoy it, and that's part of the reason that we picked them to run the show, is because we knew they would take it in a different direction and appeal to a different group of folks. So if you haven't checked out Solosaurus in a while, do so, because it's still really solid. I listened to Solosaurus, which is surreal, because would you believe I didn't do it? I didn't listen to it before because I don't like the sound of my own voice, but I like it. I like it much better now. So yeah.
That's excellent. Yeah, and there is a different dynamic because Michael, for example, is a wargamer, right?
Yep.
What a unique perspective to have on the show. And it's brilliant.
Yeah, and our whole shtick before was that I loved solo games, but wasn't that into war games. And Carter was not particularly into solo games, but was willing to explore them. And I just subjected to him to all manner of things for nearly 70 episodes. So it's very different now, but it's just, yeah, it's great stuff. Definitely check it out.
Absolutely. Links to Solosaurus will be in the description, of course. Okay, so this brings us nicely to the listener question section of the show. Before we look at the responses we got from last episode, Scruffy, what is the question for this episode?
So, the question for this episode is, what is a game that innovates on an established mechanic? So, that can be something like worker placement, it could be something like deck building, anything like that. And obviously, as we've talked about with Lost Ruins of Arnak, that happens kind of on every level with every mechanic, and even potentially with the campaign, it's having its own innovations and sort of twist on that. So the question is, what is a game that innovates on an established game mechanic?
Yeah, I'd love to know what you think, and it'd be interesting to see how many of these games we've played as well. Because, like you said, Brandon, I always want to see something new.
So the question from last episode was, how do you like to play solo RPGs?
So the first response was from Stop Somewhere Eric, and this reminds me of another shout out we need to do. Stop Somewhere Eric has been a follower of our show for a while. They write in often, and they have started their own podcast on solo activities and solo games called the Stop Somewhere Podcast. The links to it are in the description. Eric is an amazing person. Check out their podcast. Anyway, Stop Somewhere Eric said, I like the physical pen and paper. For Iron Swan, I print out the character sheets so that I can better track my progress, and then we'll have a separate notepad for just writing out story beats. Though I have a habit of bullet pointing instead of anything pretty. For a 1,000-year-old vampire, it was more of a romantic vibe. So writing a journal of a lonely vampire, I splurged on proper moleskin that I can write in and treat like a journal of this ancient beast that I was playing. The atmosphere and aesthetic of the RPG definitely matches with how I write, and I imagine a more cyberpunk role-playing game like Civitas, for example, I would see typing it on a computer as a more thematic connection. I think that's really interesting. I think that's a really interesting answer.
Yeah. Well, this reminds me of your Wretched episode where you mentioned doing audio logs, which I thought, that's just brilliant. I mean, I'm less likely to spend time writing a long flowing narrative because I spend so much time writing for work. So that doesn't sound as fun to me. But doing the audio logs I thought sounded great, but yeah, I love tailoring that to the type and atmosphere of the game. That's wonderful.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more with that. And I think it's another reason why I'm able to get on even better with Starforge than Iron Swan. I mean, still absolutely love playing Iron Swan, but I really struggle with writing by hand because one, it's a bit slower, obviously, but also I have terrible handwriting. And that weirdly breaks the immersion for me because I have to think, well, then my character must have terrible handwriting, and I can't reread my own handwriting sometimes. It's a weird little hang up that is very specific to me, but it means that when I play my own Swan games and I want to write it down, I kind of feel like I have to do it on the computer to have fun. And again, it's a disconnect because I'm looking at a screen when I'm playing Iron Swan, which thematically a bit strange.
Well, we've already spoke about my preferences last episode, but what I want to add to that is I just to defend writing by hand for a moment. I don't know. I feel like by not looking at a screen, my brain is allowed to. It's just given more freedom. It's allowed to flow out of me a lot easier. But on top of that, I love doing things like underlining, circling, or drawing a big jaggedy edge around a certain word. Like my character got marked for vengeance, and I wrote it down in capital letters, and I put a big squiggly line around it so that I knew mark. Oh, when I flick back through this, eventually looking back on my adventure, I can get to that page and go, oh, I remember exactly what happened. That's when I was marked for vengeance. Oh, that was terrible. It's silly like that, but I enjoy it. And even playing like against some kind of horrible creature, I might make a little sketch of what that looks like. I can't draw,
Mm.
but it's fun. It's fun.
No, I'm with you there, Norm, as well on the having a journal that you can doodle in. It's very good. I've started doing that with my Star Forge game. I've got a little journal that I'm using for all my RPs at the moment, and I used it when I played Scarlet Heroes as well. And just having it, what it's got lines on one side and dots on the other page opposite. I got it from Kendall's shop actually, Dork Dungeon.
The links are in the
Links to that in the
description
description
because
as
why
well.
not?
We're plugging everything today, but seriously, it's a lovely little book, and it's really helped me to sort of inspire my imagination. When I write, I just write little notes to myself, key names and stuff, and then I can draw these alien creatures that I'm coming up with on the other side of the page. I did my first ever battle map when I played Scarlet Heroes because I had this sort of dotted page that I was able to sort of sketch out little trees and terrain and put the figures there and stuff. Really
Wow.
fun for kind of taking you into out of your routine, I guess, if you're into just typing it on the computer, to have something a bit more creative that you can scribble on and work with.
Well, to your point, Norm, about your mind wandering while you write, if you use a computer, for what it's worth, I think if I ever did play, not if I ever did, who am I kidding? When I play one of these games, what I will do is I have this program that I've used on my Mac in the past called OM OMM Writer, which is just a focus writing software where you blocks everything out, puts on not like a print view type view of your page the way you would get in Microsoft Word or something, but something just like kind of a pleasant, customizable background. And
Mm,
I feel like that it's sort of dreamy looking, and I think that would allow me to sort of escape a bit more, because if I'm looking at a Word document, I'm thinking this is work for me now. This
yeah.
is not.
Yes.
I feel a
And
pressure.
you've got all your icons along the bottom there. I could just quickly check the
Yeah.
internet right now, and yeah, it just
Right. Yeah.
takes you right back to the real world, doesn't it? Well,
Yeah.
I
the
mean,
internet.
specifically this last week, I've been taking my solo Ironsworn campaign into work to do on my lunch break. And it feels like such getting away from the screen it's so powerful. When I get to my lunch, I know I'm going to turn off my monitors and I'm going to get out my pen and paper and my books. And this is play, it's separate from work, it's play. And yeah, it's nice to have that separation, I think.
Well, that's really inspired me. I'm going to try and move more to writing stuff down, especially if I go back to Iron Sworn again. Okay, next one. So we had a response from Attila who says, "For my Forbidden Lands game, I use online tools for my map, character sheets, in-game calendar, and day tracker. And I use physical books for references, and I roll real dice. For my game notes dash game diary, I use Google Docs." So kind of a mixed media approach there.
Oh yeah. That's a good idea. I think with Forbidden Lands in particular, I think I would have to use the physical map, because are you all familiar with this game?
Yes, Forbidden Lands is very interesting because it comes in a box like a board game.
Hmm.
Yes.
And I haven't played it, but from everything I hear about Forbidden Lands, it also feels very much like a board game RPG hybrid. Am I right there?
I think so. I mean, it's a hex crawl style RPG essentially, where they have a campaign book or two available for it, but it is very much a wander the landscape and see what you run into. So I think it would be very fitting for solo play. But the map is so neat because if you buy the box set, which I have, and I just love the bits in it so much. It has this paper map, and when one of your characters dies, there's a sticker sheet where you can put grave markers on the
Oh
map,
wow.
Oh,
where your other characters have gone. And if you do choose to upgrade, there is a beautiful cloth version of the map that you can spread out as well. And I think I could get lost in that, guys.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
It's a very
Wow.
cool system too. So kudos for managing all that, because it sounds like a lot
Yeah.
to handle.
Yeah, that does sound really interesting for sure.
That's something that I'm going to put in my back pocket for maybe the next planning phase, Scruffy.
I also just want to pull up there that they roll real dice.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree. I couldn't not roll real dice. I've tried it before. I've tried playing just on the computer because I'm typing on the computer. I'll tab out to Google and roll virtual dice or whatever, it's not as good, is it? I see you're shaking your head there, Brandon.
Yeah, I couldn't do it. I've used digital dice in the past,
Mm.
but I always within arm's reach have a set of D&D dice just because they feel so good. I mean, is there any die better in the world than a D12, for instance, to roll? I mean, what a wonderful tactile experience.
Well, we were going to do this is really funny. We were going to do a sort of an April Fool's episode on the best dice. That was like a fun
Yeah,
idea we had once.
and we all agree it's the
Because
D4
we
then.
have strong opinions on dice.
Yeah,
Well, I
yeah.
say we do. Kendall especially has very strong opinions on dice.
Yeah, that rolling physical dice would be a must.
Okay, the next response we got was from Rumpel Frumpkins. Rumpel Frumpkin says, I used to write it out in full prose with rolls in brackets, and I pretty much only use the character sheet and bullet points for interesting hooks and plot threads. I tried to end sessions on a cliffhanger or something unresolved so it's easy to jump back into. I usually leave myself a few sentences about the current situation to jumpstart my play next time. And in terms of the things that aren't bullet pointed, how are they resolved? They're resolved in a combination of imagination and mostly muttering to themselves. The bullet points are really just there to log important details and remind themselves of what's going on. I think one thing that I really wanted to unpack on that is none of the other answers have said about how they craft a story. Rumpel Frumpkins has said that when they try to end a session, it's always on an interesting plot hook or a cliffhanger or something to give you an in next time. I think actually that's something you don't really even have to try to do with solo role playing because naturally I find, I don't know if you agree with this, Scruffy, but when I stop, it's probably because I've gone, this part feels quite important. I'm not sure how to resolve it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have a think. And then I put the book away and I remember I've got to that really important part. I need to resolve that next. And I don't even have to plan to do that. It just naturally happens. I don't know if that happens with you as well.
Yes, for sure. If I ever stop naturally like that, lately with my Star Forge games, I stop because I have to, like real life intervenes, and I'm like, okay, I've just got to finish this sentence and then do something important because I'm playing it as much as I can. But when I've been playing kind of less feverishly, then yes, for sure, you reach those kind of moments where you hit this sort of dramatic beat, something happens, a threat's introduced, there's a conflict that you're not quite sure how it's going to revolve or even the next step forward, and that's where you go, I'll pick it back up next time. TBC.
I do that for my campaigns every session. If I can end on that kind of note, I think the players think it's for them, and it is a little bit because I know they'll talk about it during the week, but it's really for me also because I haven't quite thought my way through how to make this as dangerous and interesting for them as I can. But also, the more it rattles around in my brain, the more creative stuff I come up with all week. So yeah, definitely ended on that cliffhanger.
Yeah, you also get these points, and they kind of they are so open that you kind of go, well, what's going to happen now? I have this new threat appear that's closing in on me. There are so many possible options next.
Mhm.
I need to restrict it down and funnel it down because I can't quite keep it all in my head, and I don't want to make a weak choice. I want to do it
Mm,
justice.
I often end, you can see the last notes on my where I end the session will just be a bunch of oracle information because I'll get to a point where I go, this is an interesting decision. Let me check on some oracles. I'll roll on 2 or 3 oracles. I'll write down the results. Nothing will immediately spring to mind, and I think I'll come back to that. I'll let that stew
Yeah.
for the rest of today, and we'll come back to that another
Yeah.
time. But yeah, I think it's really, it happens naturally, which is the coolest part.
Yeah, so I think that's all the time we have for responses now. I do just want to ask one quick question of you, Brandon, before we close up the episode, if that's okay, because I'm really interested in this. Have you ever tried role playing without writing stuff down, just talking it out to yourself, or even just thinking in your head? Have you ever tried doing that for solo RP, or not yet? Or would you have any interest in trying that at all? Because it's a way of playing that I only tried for the Scarlet Heroes episode, and it's one that I'm interested in exploring more. But I'm curious to get other people's kind of impressions of that.
I think that would have to be the way I would play. I think it would
Okay.
either be that or bullet points for me because I don't find the process of writing to be restful. And not that it needs to be a restful experience, but it wouldn't be enjoyable for me on a level where I would return to it. I think I would have a hard time muttering to myself. I think that would be
Hey, character dialogue is fun to do. Like, I'm gonna say that right now. It's fun to sit there and talk out in voices to yourself.
Well, and I may end up doing it without thinking it because when I'm prepping for a D&D session, I do find myself sometimes I realize I'm talking out loud before I realize I'm doing it, especially if I'm trying to imagine how an enemy would react. So for instance, I'm running a campaign in Andrew Kolb's Neverland right now, and I knew the players were likely to try to explore this ship they could see in the distance. They don't realize they're in Neverland yet
Mhm.
because the campaign's just started, and it's the Jolly Roger. And I thought I've got to come up with a voice for Hook.
Nice.
I mean, I knew somewhere in my brain that that's what I've got to do, and that he needs to be, too polite, unnervingly polite, and yet always on the edge of a horrible violence. But that's not how I didn't sit there and think, well, now what would that sound like? I just started imagining how he would react, and before I knew it, I realized I'm talking out loud to myself in an empty room, and if my wife hears this, she's going to think I've finally done it and I've gone completely mad. But yeah, I think that would probably be how I'd have to do it, either just in my head or talking out loud. Have you tried it yet?
Yeah, it was fun to do. Like, wasn't doing it in my head, I was talking it out and talking character voices, but it did feel quite nerve-wracking. It felt quite, even trying to talk it out, imagining I was talking it out to my partner who was barely paying attention. It was still difficult, you know? It was even harder than doing something like The Wretched for an audio log, because for some reason, maybe it's because I'm doing the podcast, I'm used to talking to a mic, I can handle that, and I was able to get immersed in that because of the theme. Sitting at the table with pen and paper in front of you and starting talking, there's always that little weird doubt and little moment of like, well, do I just, is this too silly? Should I just stop doing it? And I think getting over that is a challenge, yeah, especially for grown-ups. Kids can do it no problem at all, right? They could just sit and
Right.
talk to
Yeah.
themselves for hours, and that's brilliant. And I want to recapture that for myself, and I'm hopefully we'll get there. It was funny talking to Deborah to find out that she always does it mainly for the show, but she always does it in that way of talking out her adventures. So it seems like a good way to play and a way I'd love to explore some more.
I imagine it would speed up play a lot as well.
It would have to for me. It's also you the way you talk about it, it almost sounds like an opportunity for growth for yourself as
Yes.
a human being. I like that, the idea of becoming more comfortable with yourself, because when you say out loud, you feel a little silly talking to yourself
Hmm.
in the room. And then my first thought is, yep, that's how I would feel. And then the second thought is, why though? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
the only person here. Yeah, that maybe that speaks volumes about my own anxieties.
I think we just get so used to performing a version of
Yep.
ourselves as together and not weird, because that is a sort of way that we've been reinforced that you have to interact with other people in polite society. That even when we're on our own in private with the doors closed, we feel watched by our internal critic, and getting past that, I think, is a really nice, like you say, moment of growth if you can do it, and being able to trust yourself and know that you can be vulnerable with yourself is something that is very difficult in our current society.
I think this goes beyond role playing games, and it's solo gaming does this. I remember the first
Mm,
time I sat down to play Mansions of Madness solo, I was very excited to do it. But when I started putting it all on the table and making the moves for myself and no one else, it was kind of embarrassing.
hmm.
I was like, "Ugh, I hope someone doesn't come and visit now when I got all this on the table, you know?
Yeah.
We'll be like, "Oh, you're playing on your own, are you?" Ugh. And then I thought exactly the same as you said, Brandon, like, why? What's so different about doing this to, playing on a video game by
Or
myself?
just
And
watching TV.
yeah, and I think yeah, solo gaming in general, not just role playing. Obviously, role playing to a further extent, but solo gaming in general gets you out of your comfort zone. Your own internal critic, as you put it, or society at large, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, it really breaks you out of that comfort zone, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and if you can get past it, it creates really interesting moments. I remember one of my best gaming memories is a solo game of Mansions of Madness that I was playing with the first scenario, I believe, where you have to go into a mansion, try to collect some evidence about some cult activity, possibly that this family has going on. And, spoiler, it's definitely cult activity because it's a Lovecraft story. But I had this great experience where I finally found the cult and they were practicing this ritual that would summon some awful being, and they summoned the being, and when that being came in, it was a star spawn. It killed one of my investigators outright, which means I've got to get out with this last investigator, and I think there's even a time limit after one of them dies. But someone had also knocked over a lantern, so there's fire spreading throughout this mansion. There's a giant star spawn chasing me through the house, and my last character, who is an older woman, is injured, and so she can't move as fast, and she managed to get out the front door of the house on the last possible turn before she would have died. And when she did, I was sitting at my desk in a room alone by myself, and I went, woo, just like I can't. Yes. And it was, it's so, in that moment I felt silly, but also just when I got over that, just completely exhilarating, right? That's one of those moments that I am never going to forget. It was so cinematic, but it involves letting go of some of that stuff that holds us back. Being watched by your internal critic is a line that's gonna haunt me for a little while longer than I'd like it to, I think.
Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of the show. Once again, thank you so much, Brandon, for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you all so much for having me on. It was lovely to chat with you.
Excellent. Yeah, the feeling is definitely mutual. So, if you'd like to answer this episode's question, just a reminder of what that question is, Scruffy.
So, the question this episode is: what is a game that innovates on an established board game mechanism? For example, worker placement or deck building, whatever you like.
Excellent. If you'd like to write in, you can do so in a number of ways. You can join our Discord. It's free to join. The links are in the description. Why wouldn't you join if it's free? I mean, what are you afraid of?
Your own internal critic.
You can also email us. We're alwaysplay1podcast@gmail.com. You can, of course, get us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Links to both are in the description. We're also on Reddit. It's always_player_1. If you'd like to reach us on Instagram, it's @alwaysplayer1podcast. You can also support the show in a number of ways. You can support the show on Patreon, patreon.com/alwaysplay1podcast. Go ahead and check out our Patreon. If you do so, any pledge will give you access to our behind the scenes episodes, the planning phase, which is really, really a lot of fun, and it's a great show.
And the polls.
And yes, you get to vote in the polls. We currently have a poll open at the moment about what we should cover in episode 29. So definitely get over there and get voting. You can also buy us a cup of coffee. It's coffee, which is ko-fi/alwaysplayer1. Yeah, just check us a cup of coffee. It all goes towards supporting the show. Alternatively, you can tell a friend about us. We love it when you talk about us online. It makes such a huge difference. When was the last time you spoke about us online? If you're thinking it's been a while, go ahead and annoy some people online, because it definitely helps. Yes, that brings about the end of the show. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks for another episode. Catch you later.
Thank you guys for listening, and thank you, Brandon, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the show, don't forget to check out our Patreon page. The links to that are in the description. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Always Player One. Until then, reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or by email to keep the conversation going.